So welcome to another week of Lunch Money brought to you by Sharesies. So at Sharesies, our purpose is to create the most financially empowered generation.
And for those of you that are new to Lunch Money, we do these every Thursday lunchtime, New Zealand time. And this is a place where you as investors can hear from the people leading some of the companies available on the Sharesies platform and other investing experts.
Lunch Money is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. So please, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're able to take a moment to leave a rating or a comment, we'd really appreciate it. So my name is Alice and I'm a financial analyst here at Sharesies. Joined with me today is Brooke, one of our co-founders.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. I'm based in Sydney on Gadigal land, so I just want to pay my respects to the traditional owners, custodians of the land, the Gadigal people of the Ora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
Cool, thanks Brooke. Now Brooke's video is a little bit shaky today, but she'll still be on the audio, so don't worry if you can't see her at times. There you are, you're back, Brooke.
Didn't even know
You disappeared for a second. Cool. Awesome. So just a reminder, if you have any questions for us, you can submit them through the Ask a Question button down below, but don't leave any questions in the discussion area as we're likely to miss them.
I also want to let you know about an exciting update we made. You might have seen it. We've launched another new podcast called Recap, and that's every Monday, Friday. It's about 10 minutes long, and it comes out at about 5 p.m. and it gives you an update of what's been happening in the financial news that week in a fun and easy to digest way. And you can get that on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Pocket Casts, and it will soon be available on Apple Podcasts too.
Awesome. So just a legal disclaimer, we don't give personalised financial advice. So investing involves risk. You aren't guaranteed to make money and you might lose the money you start with. We don't provide personalised advice or recommendations, and any information we provide is general only and current at the time. Also, please be kind and respectful towards our speakers and your fellow viewers. Otherwise, we will have to take steps to remove you from the webinar, but we really don't want to have to do that.
So today I'm really excited that we're joined by Debbie Birch. I've had the privilege of being able to meet her quite a few times and have really enjoyed our conversations. And a bit about Debbie: over the last 30 years, she's had a lot of experience in financial markets, and most recently she has been a professional director, and her focus is on Māori economic development and investing. So really important kaupapa she's got, and really looking forward to talking to her more about her career and what she gets up to. So haere mai, welcome Debbie.
Kia ora. Lovely to see you again, Brooke and Alice. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's so great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this chat. But to kick things off, it would be great if you're able to just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your career, the types of things you're involved with, and how you got to where you are today.
Right. Well, I guess like most people, I went to uni and had an idea about being a chemist. So I embarked on a BSc, spent a couple of years studying chemistry, and had to go and get a job. Even in those days, it was quite hard, as a poor student, even with no mum and dad being able to provide funding. So I actually was really lucky because I took a job in a development bank, and that was really in an area I didn't know anything about. But I was really lucky because I had a guy my boss, who saw something in me and actually sent me around the world to train on financial markets, money markets, bonds, currencies. And so that kicked off a love really for being involved in financial markets, and that was back in the 80s when there really were very few women around in those days as well. So I've had quite a long career. I've spent a good deal of it offshore. So I left New Zealand in 87 and went to Asia, spent 9 years in Asia working for really large global banks, managing their capital markets operations, and then set up a fund in Australia in 1995, spent 8 years there. That fund managed money for uber high net worths, and it was quite sort of innovative at the time. And then after that, sold the business, came back to New Zealand when the currency was 50 cents or thereabouts, and settled back in New Zealand. I've really sort of reinvented myself a little bit because I came back not realising how much had happened in the Maori sector. So that's where my concentration's been. I think I just looked at where I could add the greatest value, and so that's really been my focus for the last 10 years, really. And I was quite lucky to also be offered a role with the Maori Trustee, which is an institution that's been around for 90 plus years. So I was given the opportunity to look at how to create models to lift economic performance, particularly for landowners. So, I spent quite a bit of time thinking and implementing models that move, landowners from being just sort of getting peppercorn rents to actually getting some decent return. And so some of that, and probably the most visible, would be the creation of a boot model for kiwi fruit orchards in the Bay of Plenty. So quite a big project, something I'm quite proud of anyway. And then after about 4.5 years there, I decided to move into full-time governance because I thought that I could be more influential in a governance role. And you get to an age too where you think, you're probably more effective as a governor than as an operator. So that was my thinking then. And I was really lucky. I was offered lots of board roles. I mixed it up a bit. So, some of them were iwi, Maori, commercial entities. Others were THL, which is listed, and some other, what I thought were really interesting boards around performance. One was local government. They created their own rating system, rating performance. And I've just been on a bit of a journey. I have got involved in lots of projects that I can look back on and be proud of. Some of them I'll talk about today, actually. What gets me out of bed in the morning is actually thinking about what I can do to move the dial, whatever it might be, and using all the skills that I've got to actually put whatever into effect that I can to create greater wealth and prosperity for Maori. And of course, that's my heritage as well. I'm tūwhare toa. But I do sit on 3 boards, two that I whakapapa into, and one I'm an independent director of, and that's in Ngāti Awa and Whakatane. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
So wide-ranging, and there's so much to go into there. I want to go back to what you said at the start about your boss sending you around the world in the 80s and getting, right into financial markets. I'd love to hear any stories you've got from that time. What was it like being a woman in a wahine toa and, traveling the world in the 80s? I've been watching Black Monday recently, which is about finance in the 80s, and it just seemed like a really interesting time. So...
Well, there's just so much going on, and my colleagues, my male colleagues at the time, were surprised that why me, and I actually rang my boss, my then boss, about a month ago, and said, "Look, why me at that time?" Well, he said, "Well, women are actually quite good." He sees them as better at managing money than perhaps male colleagues, stick around for longer, are loyal, and don't have the egos. So, and actually in my experience offshore, I found in Asia that there were a lot of Asian women running really large portfolios, and yep, they're black and white, no emotion, it's all about the bottom line. And yeah, so I think for any woman who wants to, this is not a traditional area for women to get involved in, but I think it's a lot easier probably today than it was then. But, I was just lucky I had this guy who supported me and invested in me. So, it's quite interesting because 40 years on, I'm the only one standing. Others have gone off into other roles and done different things. So it's quite interesting, really.
Yeah, it's really important to invest in your people way, and now we know that there's a real lack of women or a lot of minority groups too in directorships, and you've got a really strong directorships. Can you give us a bit of an explanation on the role of the board of directors for a company and the organisations you're part of, and why being a director or having a board is so important?
Well, what's the board's function? It's to really lead strategy, and make sure the company's performing well, and that you've identified risk, and in some ways also you help to mitigate that risk with innovation. I think you have to be a little bit creative and innovative these days than perhaps was the case 20 years ago. Why me on a board? I think my background in capital markets involved assessing risk, because back in the day it was all about the bottom line. You don't have to think about non-financial issues, and back then it was really how much money you could make was the key. And for some companies that's still the case, but the world's changing. So risk can encompass financial risk as well as climate risk, and the risk of actually not actually having the right culture in a business. So I see myself really in the risk space more than anything else. And of course, just understanding that you have to think about your stakeholders. It's not just the bottom line. Stakeholders need to be listened to, taken account of. And so, I have learnt quite a lot from all the boards I've been involved in. And today I sit on just 4 boards, 3 Maori, entities owned, and THL, which is listed. And they're all different, because even if you can't really sort of put Maori into a box and go, they're all the same, because they're actually not. They, even when it comes to values, there's a different interpretation of what manaakitanga means. Does that mean you co-invest? What does that actually mean? It can mean lots of different things. The interpretation can be different from one iwi to another. So it's constantly. I find it really interesting, and sometimes it's challenging, because, no business is perfect. There's always issues, and it's all about prioritization and working with management to help mitigate or solve problems. That's how I see boards operating, which it could easily be. It's much broader these days than it ever used to be. So yeah, I just love what I do. Actually, I really love it.
That's so great, and I think that enjoyment of a job and that you're able to bring so much more I guess passion and care for the role, and you've held so many directorships over the course of your career, Debbie. And even though you say they are all different, are there any key lessons you've learnt along the way, or things that you think are key to effective governance of an organisation in general?
Well, when I think about perhaps if I give an example, I'll introduce Rupaihu Alpine Lifts, where I was a director for 4 years. Listening to stakeholders is the one big lesson. If you don't, then there will be issues. So that was something I learned, but also something I shared with that board was actually listening and being mindful of iwi in the region. And that really led to when we were thinking about climate change and the possibility of the ski fields retreating, and potentially, there may not be a ski field 20 years' time. Who knows? But that led to the idea of putting the gondola in, which is now operating. When we were thinking about the gondola, we then thought about how would we fund it. So we, and this is sort of where my experience came in a little bit with the creation of an infrastructure bond. That infrastructure bond was structured so that bond owners would receive a minimum interest rate and participate in the upside as well. So quite unique, but we managed to sell those bonds to surrounding iwi groups. We've got there were 12 different Māori entities invested in the bond, and what then spun out of that was supply agreements where they were supplying, venison, beef, lamb, honey, to RAL for its, and not large, but it sort of then created a partnership, and I just think that's a great thing. You've got alignment, and despite COVID, the gondola has continued to operate and provide at least that minimum return, and I believe that the numbers are higher this year, and I would expect a bigger return. So the bond is linked to passenger numbers. So when you get beyond a certain number of passengers, the return they get rises. So I just think it's a good story.
Great community too, coming together and. And we heard that you named the gondolas Skywalker. So it's
Skywalker. Yeah, we were sitting around the table thinking I said we need to give it a name. It needs to have a name. And I thought we were sort of chucking ideas around, and I said, what about Star Wars, something out of Star Wars, and what about Luke Skywalker? And I said Skywalker by mistake, a slip of the tongue, and everyone said, that's it, that's the name. So it didn't actually take that long at all. It was 10 minutes of a bit of a chat. And I just had to check it with various elders, iwi elders, just to make sure that they weren't unhappy with this kind of name. No, everyone was happy. So so the Skywalker, has come to life. And I don't know if it's been up there, but it is fabulous, the view. And previously, to get up to the top, you would have had to have been kitted out in ski gear, have proper footwear. So anyone in a wheelchair or young children, it was really difficult to get people up there. And and we probably could have called it a sustainable bond, or we could have, labelled it. It was quite early then, but it's basically got very close to zero carbon footprint because of modern technology and renewable energy. So, it sort of ticks lots of boxes for everybody, for the investors.
That sounds great. And it's like you said, taking into account those non-financial things like the climate risk, which actually do end up having a financial impact in the end anyway, and worse impact. So it's really good that all those things were considered there. Yeah. Really keen to touch on, you're the executive chairperson of IWIinvestor. Can you tell us a little bit about what IWIinvestor is, what you do at IWIinvestor, and kind of the co-papa there?
Okay, IWIinvestor has been around for more than 20 years. It was actually set up to manage funds out for forestry companies, well, principally for its owner, which is the Lake Taupo Forest Trust. And it has quite a history, actually. Mark Toomey and Adrian Orr were part of it in its early life. In the early 2000s. I think they were both on the investment committee, and even at that stage there was a view that it had potential to do more, to be more. And since then, I've been in the role of executive chair for the last 4 years, and we've just built it up. We've changed the model a little bit because it's quite expensive to bring in expertise. So we have an outsource model. We outsource to who we think are appropriate consultants for our kaupapa, because we invest with an SRI lens. And that's the only way we can really align with our cultural values, because there's not, it's very hard to find those investments that are locally that meet all those requirements. So we've invested in listed markets and funds that, are SRI focused. And so about 80% of our portfolios are with an SRI lens. For those as time goes by.
So I was going to say, for the listeners who might not know SRI, Social Responsible Investing, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think if you think about it, we are long-term investors, so we have to take into account sustainability. What does that actually mean? It's looking after people and planet, essentially, because if you don't, you're not going to get the financial returns in the future. So many charitable funds are doing the same thing because they're also very long-term. And so what does that mean in terms of investing? Where we expect that the companies we invest in meet certain criteria, and some have a strong ESG focus, which is another word, again, another acronym, which stands for environment, social and governance. And some companies are more focused on the environmental piece rather than the social and governance piece. So it is quite an exercise trying to determine weightings, monitoring as well. And this is a challenge, I think, for any investor trying to achieve, SRI or ESG or impact, KPIs. It is down to the data and the monitoring, and it's still in its early days. So we just do the best we can. We get consultants in, and because we're a very small organisation. We're all quite bizarrely all women, which was not really intentional. It's just sort of worked out that way. But anyway, we manage 260 million of funds for about 40 Maori entities. Many of them are in the Central North Island. Others are spread across the country. Why do they invest with us? Because we try to keep our fees within the lowest quartile and performance in the upper quartile, and we've managed to, we believe, achieve that over the last 10 years. So, and we're just constantly trying to keep costs as low as we can. We operate really within a cultural framework, and the business does. So, we're very much focused on making sure that we do that. So we all our clients are Māori entities. We follow proper tikanga and protocol. When we have meetings, we're always considering how we improve not just wealth in dollar terms, but whether employment opportunities and other opportunities around the environment, then that we take that into consideration. It's not necessarily the primary driver, but it is a consideration. And look, we're not, I just think the rest of the world is now adopting this approach as well. We're no longer unique, which is fabulous, really. It makes our job a bit easier as well. So we expect that that our client base will grow. There is interest in what we're doing. It's not just performance; it's just the way we operate. I think is probably more important.
That's awesome, and really interesting to hear how you're sort of bringing in all of those different factors like employment and as you say, almost like the rest of the world's catching up now on that approach to thinking about those other stakeholders as well, and not just the bottom line profits. Something I read on the IWIinvestor website that I'm quite interested to hear a bit more about is a private equity fund model for Māori and iwi that co-invest. It's called the Te Puia Tapapa Direct Investment Fund. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you've done there and what that fund does?
Yeah, this was born out of an idea that I had 2016. I found it quite frustrating that really large opportunities to invest were bypassing Maori entities. They'd go to the super fund, ACC, and the Todd group, those big institutional investors, and that'd typically be the transactions that I would want to invest in. And I thought, well, how can we actually get access? So the conversation started with that, and really Catherine Savage was the chair of the super fund at the time, and it was a conversation with her along with Paul Quinn, who chairs Ngāti Awa, around, look, can we create a fund where we can sit beside you and invest in what you invest in? Is that possible? And she was quite excited by the idea. So that was really how it was born. And there were many naysayers. Many thought it was not possible. You'll never get Maori holding hands together in anything, but and it was hard work to begin with, but it was formed in 2019. It has 26 investor groups. One of them I represent, which is Tūwhare, of which there are 10 individual entities forming one group. So I consider that really successful. There are others who said no, they didn't want to come into this, and have said that they do now. So it'll be interesting to see how we go from here. We've got 115 million, which isn't a lot really, but it's a start. And we've already invested in 3 different companies, 2 of them with the super fund being a co-investor, and another one where Pinkaro Private Equity Fund were invested. We have 3 major investment themes that we look at: decarbonisation being one, healthcare being the other, and technology. What I found really interesting is that we have the same values as the super fund. We're very, very long term, and we see ourselves as responsible investors. And the super fund and Te Pui Tāpapa have an MOU where we, it's not just one way. If we come across an opportunity to invest in something that might be of interest to them, we also share. So yeah, it's interesting. Some of the investee companies are quite interested in bringing Maori into their businesses. They see an opportunity here too, so that's really positive.
There's something you mentioned there was around how many investor groups you have involved with the fund. I think you said 26. That seems like a lot of different investors to cater to. And how do you go about aligning all of their interests and ensuring that, the investments, that the returns will be equitable and things like that?
Many of them are really small. We have investor update meetings, and we have one recently where they're invited to attend and ask questions. And because part of the excitement for them is not just investing in these great companies that we've already invested in, but it's actually learning. It's that thirst for knowledge. So we do need to spend more time on that. You don't know at the beginning how much interest there will be from investors and how active they want to be, but regular reporting, we report quarterly to them as any fund would do, and take feedback and take that into account. At the beginning, there was some questions around fees and the size of the board and those sorts of things, which we've resolved. And now going forward, I can see that there is interest in just learning about investing. So I'm not unsure yet how we deal with that, but at IWIinvestor, we actually ran a project workshop on investment governance for trustees of land trusts that are not used to governing investments, just to help them and give them the tools to think about what questions they need to ask to satisfy their duties as trustees. And of course, the Trust Act has changed as well, which means that they really need to, if they don't already have some knowledge, they need to build it out, because they'll have to. But it's great. There's so much excitement in investing now than there was 4 years ago. The whole landscape's changed, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely found that on our journey with Sharesies too, starting at 4 years ago, where no one felt they could be an investor, and now, making that a lot more accessible, and then seeing that global trend start to occur too, where these markets are really opening up and people are being able to get exposure to these conversations and really actively wanting to make sure their money is going towards the future that they want to see for themselves, for their children, Mokopuna. So it's really exciting future there. I'm also really interested in touching on you've mentioned Kiwifruit earlier, but I'm interested in Tourism Holdings. That's a listed company that you're on the board of. And, through the COVID times and the, countries locking down, that must have been a really challenging time to be part of that company. I'd be really keen to hear a bit more about your experience there, the challenges being faced during the pandemic, and what's it been like for you, and what's the future you see that you can share? Well,
THL has a really strong management team, which and I have to take my hat off to them, because last year, gosh, I don't think anyone involved in any tourism business wasn't working their butts off. And from scenario planning to scenario planning, from 1 month to the next, depending on perceived outcome of lockdowns and then opening up. And it continues to be challenging. But I have enormous confidence in our CEO, who I think he's a sensational operator, and the team he's got around him, fantastic. I guess we thought that at some time soon we'd be coming out of, this period, but I guess it looks like it's going to take a lot longer. So what does that mean? It's managing cash flow, getting your banking facilities sorted. We've done a lot of that already. And surprisingly, what I think surprised us was the level of interest in buying RVs globally. I don't think we actually quite predicted that, but so there's still tremendous demand. So we're a global company, but now we're really a group of domestic businesses as opposed to being one global business. So that's required some agility, within the team and the business. I think they've done incredibly well given the situation. And what does the future hold? Well, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty, and I think there's still demand for RVs. Will the international tourists come back to New Zealand and rent RVs? Well, it's really hard to know at this point, but I think the company's done really, really well. We knew at the very beginning that there had to be some leadership from somewhere. So the Get Moving campaign, where we discounted RVs in New Zealand, was part of that initiative, and successful in getting a whole lot of new people into RVs that hadn't ever rented one. There's lots of ideas coming through on managing the business in a new environment. I hope that it will be different in the future, but I do think you couldn't get a more capable management team than the one that THL has. And Rob Campbell's a great chair as well. We have a diverse skill set at the board level. I obviously, I'm the only Maori woman, but I hope that, and this is all part of leadership as well. It's creating space for others after me also, because I won't be there forever. So we do have an arrangement with the hapu that essentially own Waitumo Caves. So we have a really great relationship with them, and Grant sat down with them recently to work out, what do you want to see? How do you want to operate? How do you want us to operate in the future? And created a model with them, which I think is fabulous. In fact, I looked at it and I thought I couldn't believe it.
That sounds great. It sounds like making the most of this time and leaning into it. And you got me thinking in my mind touring the South Island in an RV at some stage. You mentioned early on too, like one of your most proudest things, and forgive me if I'm misquoting this, but was around something around kiwi fruit you've been doing recently. Do you want to expand on that and why you're so proud of it?
Two things, actually. Creating Te Puia Tāpapa and that co-investment fund spurred other activity, and some of those parties who are part of the fund have actually formed a partnership and have bought New Zealand's largest kiwi fruit orchard, which and I don't know whether we would have done it otherwise, but it's a year later we'd bought this kiwi fruit orchard in a competitive tender, and that's all pretty exciting. It's I don't know if you know much about kiwi fruit, but it's certainly had was a great year last year and the year before, and long may it last. And the other thing I'm excited about is when I was at to Tumu Pairo, which is the Maori Trust office. We developed a boot model for developing kiwi fruit orchards on Maori land in the Bay of Plenty. And we partnered with Quayside Investments. And that involved about 30 blocks of land. I believe it's been increased since then. So what that means is that investors invest in the infrastructure and the business, but the land is not put at risk. So essentially, you're leasing the land, then you're handing the business over after 30 to 60 years, once you've achieved the return that the investors were looking for. So I think at that time, low double-digit returns, what does that look like? How long do you need to invest for to achieve that? Because there's a big upfront cost in investing in kiwi fruit infrastructure. So, yeah, I mean, you can't put anything on Maori land and put the land at risk. So I'm quite proud of that bit of thinking at the time. Boot models are typically used for large infrastructure projects. So I just use the same concept. And so you used to be able to drive around the Bay of Plenty and you see these beautiful kiwi fruit orchards, and then next door there'd be an ugly bit of land that had nothing on it. So one day I want to drive around and see it all like planted out,
That sounds fantastic. I grew up in Tauranga, and I remember that, the copious amounts of honesty boxes and fresh fruit. It's a beautiful region, and it's great to see that restoration and that care that you and the team are taking there. So thank you so much, Debbie, for letting us skip down memory lane with you, and also think about the future and the importance of boards and the work that you're doing around Māori economic development and prosperity for all of us here in Aotearoa and to the world. So thank you very much, Debbie. I really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for tuning in too. Next Thursday we'll be joined by Gara Ruloff, who is the co-founder and managing director of Lay-By, which is a listed company, and they'll be here to chat about the buy now, pay later sector, which there's quite a lot of interest in at the moment. So looking forward to that.
So you can register for that for next Thursday's Lunch Money through a link that will be put in the chat. Once again, thanks Debbie for joining us today. That's been really really cool to hear about your journey to where you are and all the different things you've been involved with. Thanks everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you next week.